drawing fish in from AC power, I go slowing haddock larvae down by 60%, which was another study found out of the United Kingdom, showing when juvenile haddock larvae approached EMF fields, 60% of them slowed, which put them into higher predation. This is just a small example of the loop cooling system. Again, like I said, they'll be drawing, if you use the Sunrise Wind Appendix N2, it calls for a 27 square foot opening, 40 feet from the ocean floor, with a 500 micron screen, which is 0.43 inches. Now, technically, there's 3 lift pumps on the cooling station at 6.1 million gallons apiece. They claim to be running it at a 30% load, but they're still claiming to be pumping 2.5 to 3.5 million gallons per day, per station. Now, these stations, through the N2 appendix, states that they're only good to 1,034 megawatts. Well, every 1,000 megawatts is 1 gigawatt. And I just told you, right now, that area for placement in the WEAs is big enough for 32, which would require 32 if we decided to deploy the whole area. But even if we go with 13, we're still talking billion gallons a year of heated, chlorinated, dead water back into our ecosystem. This is just another example. Lobster studies as well showed that EMF had direct effects against mutations in lobsters, specifically the eye carapaces and the backs, which slowed the vertical swimming of the lobsters, which put them into predation as well. Now, Dr. Bob Baer also is on the board with NEF, the New England Fishermen Foundation. He even states in some of his research, heating a lobster, what we'll do is it'll get to maturity faster. But the problem is the survivability of the eggs decrease because of, well, fast mutation and maturity. The older a lobster gets, the more likely the life cycle of the eggs will be redundant. So this is another effect. So in areas when we're burying cables coming towards shore, well, when we get closer to shore on the ledges, well, they're using concrete structures and pads to cover the exposed cables. Well, that is exactly the type of environment when juvenile lobsters settle that they'll be looking for. So literally we'll be having lobsters crawl under these curtains, getting direct EMF and heat, which will have a direct effect against the sustainability. I know in our state of Maine, lobstering is the 3rd largest industry in our state. What happens when we start directly affecting the natural resources, which keeps our working waterfronts going? This is not good for anybody in the future, especially for the future harvesters coming in. This is just another example of the eggs on a female lobster. Again, when the eggs are laid, when they hatch, they'll make their way to the top of the water column. Like I said, well, they'll take a ride in the gyre before they find settlement. This is another example of juvenile lobsters, technically when they go to make their settlement. This is what the stage where they'll be crawling up under these concrete slabs. This is also a direct effect on the natural sustainability of our shellfish. Codfish too, or another prime example. Again, acoustic study showed that juvenile codfish larvae were attracted to EMF. They did a study where they took a handful of cod larvae, put them in a controlled environment. They were directly attracted to the EMF. So again, what happens when we put floating turbines in? We're literally ringing the dinner bell for predation on our natural resources, which will have a direct effect against the sustainability in the long term. Again, with a haddock as well, a haddock larvae showed the same. When EMF was emitted to haddock larvae, 60% of those also slowed, which put them into higher predation. This is just another example of the daisy chaining. Now, on the mooring lines, they're claiming that they can keep the mooring structure from moving more than 50 feet. What will happen is when you got the 7-to-1 anchoring system out, the AC cable will have to go out beyond the anchoring system. I mean, technically, me and George have been trying to do some calculations on this. What are we figuring? Roughly about a mile of cable, probably, that'll be emitted through, AC cables emitted through the water column between turbines. And that's not counting all the way to the substation. And then you got to talk about the cables going from the substation to the cooling station. That's a lot of exposed cable, and that's a lot of exposed larvae. This is just an example of the anchoring chains. I mean, again, we don't really build that size chain here in the United States either. I think that's something that everybody should be aware of. I think I did a rough estimate on the water depth. I figured you could run the anchoring chain end for end from Portland, Maine to Miami 3 times. You probably have enough slack to get to Key West. Now you're going to talk about that same anchoring chain is also going to be home to sea squirts, barnacles, and blue mussels, which will also, the bivalves will have direct effect against larval status too, because whether they eat them or not, they still spit them back out dead. That's just one more effect on top of offshore wind. Again, this is just talking about the underwater view. As you see the circle on the top, that is just the spatial area for where the shifting of the... So if you get a hard easterly and a hard westerly, you've got a 3-staging anchoring system. So those chains will have enough slack to shift from one way to the other, which when we start shifting chain on bottom, you create sediment plumes. And not to mention anything around the chains gets crushed. That's another effect that we're not really talking about too in the long term. So this is just a vessel, my old vessel, on a good day, setting out. We still have a lot of trawlers here in the United States. Specifically, the trawlers we have left are getting to be less and less every day. I mean, every major fishing port I've gone to is severely depleted. I remember as a child 20 years ago, just in the state of Maine, vessels were 5 wide. Working in Gloucester, they were 5 wide. I think there was an estimated 1,200 vessels there. I think now they're down to less than 17. And the same thing goes with the state of Maine. And now 90% of the seafood consumed in the United States is now foreign product. That's something that most people just are not aware of. Goes right back against the food securities. This is just going to make us more dependent upon foreign nations feeding this nation in the long run. And that's something that we directly here at NEFSA have big issues with. Now, this is the same vessel on a nasty day. Why do I have these 2 examples? Well, when it comes to a nice day, you know, on a clear day, your radar works nice. On a day like the day before, now you got interference. You got low levels of cloud interference. You know, there's a lot going on. Well, next slide. Now you got to add on radar interference from turbines. So not only will we have to be transiting through offshore wind sites with a bad day, having turbulence like this on your radar, but now you add on 20-foot seas because you have to get back to shore because of the weather variances in New England. Now you're going to be, well, once the nighttime comes in, you're literally running in the blind. And again, like I told you, if you get into trouble coming through these windmill sites, the Coast Guard does not have a written report on how they're going to save you or rescue you. This is still something we're working on, but nobody wants to talk about. Now, this is just another one talking about a report I've been reading the last couple of days about bisphenol A. What it is a chemical inside of the blades and the resin. Well, what happens is the bigger the distance and the speed on the turbines, what it is a micro nanoplastic that chips off of the blades, which ends up more microplastics and nanoplastics into our water. Well, the problem with bisphenol A is it's also known to be causing human infertility, and it's damaging to all organisms. So again, like I asked, I go, here in the Gulf of Maine, you know, we have a lot of wind, we have a lot of weather, then you've got freezing spray. Well, that freezing spray over time will chip away at these blades. I think the average blade is replaced at 2 years per turbine, is what the average estimate is. So just imagine all that wind shear and all that micro dust going into our water columns. That's going to have a big effect. Next slide. That is just one example of the erosion on the windmill blades. So all of that resin and toxin is now into the water. Now we're also talking about putting aquaculture finfish farms inside of these array areas. So we're going to concentrate fish inside of an area where we have bisphenol A, forever chemicals that are in the water column, getting into the natural food. Not only from the aquaculture, but from the natural resources too. So we're taking wild, hard, healthy product and we're toxifying it. And that's going to go on the dinner table of every U.S. citizen. This is just another prime example.